Well, hello, greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias. I'm Tobias, and this is Knife Chats. If you like what you see, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Here's a knife you don't see too often anymore, and that is the Traveler by Chicago Cutlery. I'm a big fan of Chicago Cutlery, and that's the main reason I picked up the Traveler. I don't know if a lot of other people would be bothering to pick it up, but the folding knives of Chicago Cutlery kind of have an interesting story behind them, because if you're familiar with Chicago Cutlery at all, you know that this is not the kind of knife that they would normally make. Now, the reason I'm a fan of Chicago Cutlery is because, well, that's the knives I use in my kitchen. These are old knives, too. They're not new. Probably a good 40, 50 years old. Maybe even older than that, because the knives were originally in my mother's kitchen. And what you have are really just nice, robust kitchen knives. This particular one is a steak knife with a 4-inch handle and about a 4.5-inch blade. You notice a nice grind going on there. These are carbon steel blades also. And the handles on it are walnut handles, held on with very large brass rivets. Not something you see all the time anymore. But the knife holds a great edge, and well, I just like them. So that's why when I saw the Traveler by Chicago Cutlery, I kind of just said, I got to get me one of those, and so I did. An interesting thing also, I mentioned that Chicago Cutlery makes kitchen knives, but technically, as this is a steak knife, this is not truly a kitchen knife. The steak knife is actually a table knife, and it is the only sharp knife that should be found on a table. I know it's just a minor technicality, but in theory, that's the case. The steak knife is a table knife, but just about any other knife you find in the kitchen, your paring knife, your boning knife, your fillet knife, your butcher knives, your chef's knives, and everything else, those are technically kitchen knives, whereas a steak knife is a table knife. And that brings us to the Traveler. So back around the end of the 1970s or beginning of the 1980s, and throughout the 1980s, Chicago Cutlery decided they were going to take an adventure into outdoor knives. And during that time, they produced about 3 different lockbacks, like I think like a 3.5-inch, a 4-inch, and a 5-inch lockback. About 3 or 4 different sizes of Stockmans, and a couple different pen knives, as well as the Traveler, which was a folding fillet knife. I've also seen it listed as a folding steak knife, depending on who is marketing it, I guess. I don't know if Chicago Cutlery called it a fillet knife or a steak knife, or if they said both, maybe at different times. But it's definitely more fillet than it is steak, but it's really just a pretty cool knife, and definitely a big knife. And as you can see, like the other Chicago Cutlery knives, it came with some wonderful walnut handles, just stamped Chicago Cutlery, and then the Traveler. The model number for the Traveler was the P25. It's got the signature brass rivet at the top, and then smaller brass rivets holding on the back spring. I'm not sure. I believe the blades are carbon steel, but I am not 100% sure. They could very well also be stainless. Let's see if we can see there. Do you see there? There is brass liners running along there too. Yeah, you can see it a little bit better there. See the brass liners going on. And just a really fabulous looking knife with some really sweet lines going on there. And then when you open it up, you got this really long blade. about a 5.5 inch long blade. You see there, Chicago Cutlery. On the backside, P25 USA. They also made a lockback version of this knife, exactly same frame, same blade and everything. The only difference is there's a lockback on the back, and in that case it'll say LH25 USA. Later models of it were made in Japan. And from what I understand, all of the Chicago Cutlery folding knives that came out in the 1980s or so, or at least the early ones, the ones that were made in the USA, were made by the Schrade Company. And that's very obvious when you see the 5-inch lockback, because it is a spitting image of the Schrade LB7, except it's got the walnut handles you find on Chicago Cutlery knives, and it has the Chicago Cutlery markings on it. The cool thing about the Traveler is just the walnut handles from end to end and the big brass bird's eye rivet. Now the original ones, the ones that were made in the USA, came with this heavy duty leather pouch or belt sheath, and it's a very heavy leather. The knife goes in there nicely and embossed Chicago Cutlery, and you see there they nicely stitched, riveted at the top and everything else, and you just don't find them that often anymore with the original leather sheath. And this one's in really good shape, other than like a little dent here and a little scratch there. And the knife also is in very good shape. Again, just a little nick there. I don't think this was used very much at all. But as you can see from the blade, it's got a nice flex to it. So I believe it's really more of a fillet knife than a steak knife, but there's nothing that says you can't cut a steak up with it. And it holds a great edge. I believe it is carbon steel, but I do not know. It could very well be stainless. Usually when things are stainless, back in the 80s, it would have been marked stainless. Kind of good edge going on to it. In any case, that's my Chicago Cutlery Traveler. Now, what I've heard about it is a lot of people have said what these knives were based on is the Mighty Anglers by Schrade, that they basically just took the Mighty Angler and converted it into this knife for Chicago Cutlery. But I've got two Mighty Anglers here, the MA5 and the MA6, and you'll see that they are not the same thing. So even if this knife was made by Schrade, and I suspect they are correct on that part, it is not a Mighty Angler that was just moved over. So the first one I got here is the MA5, and this is a current production one. So I was thinking, well, maybe they did something with the current production that made it a little different. I'll tell you one thing, the current production is kind of chintzy. You notice it's got a very hard angle going on there, and you see the finger grooves. But as you can see on the older one here, the finger grooves are also there. So that was the first clue that the Chicago Cutlery, they did more than just remove the finger grooves. You also notice you've got a actual bolster that is bolted in or riveted into the wood. So they cut out the wood and they added a steel bolster to add a little strength to the top. And they also have a hole drilled through the bottom. Easily you could drill a hole through the bottom there if you wanted to, I guess. But then when you open it up, you'll see the blade here, and the blade is definitely different. See here, MA5, Mighty Angler 5. This is their 5-inch version, and this says first production run out of China, though. And you got the lockback going on there, but as I mentioned, the LH25 would have been a lockback, and the lockback would have been in about the same location. But the thing is, if you see the Traveler next to it, notice the length. the Traveler is longer than the MA5. The Mighty Angler 5 is shorter, and especially when you open it up and look at the blade length. Can you see the blade length difference there? It's significantly different. Also, the kick on it is different here. And if you notice, all of the Mighty Anglers have this little portion of serrated edge at the top right there for cutting through bone and gristle and stuff, which actually would have been a nice touch on this knife if it had been done that way. But Chicago Cutlery, they really don't have a lot of, at least in my notice of it, Chicago Cutlery doesn't make a lot of serrated blades. The only blade I can think of that is serrated is their bread knife. They might have another one too, but I believe the bread knife is the one that is serrated. But you can see it's definitely a different blade going on with that. And the overall shape of the handle is different, and the overall handle length and size is different. You can see they're close, but they're not quite the same. Can we get it? Yeah. That's how much of a difference is in length. So, and blade length is definitely much different. So it's definitely not the MA5. And if you think of the MA6, well, the MA6, this is a USA made one, so it is definitely a better quality. It is rounded around the edges here, so it's not nearly got the sharp cut going on. So it's going to feel a lot better in your hand. This I'm going to have to grind down all the way around, including the bolster, in order to make it feel better. But the finger grooves are ground down a little bit better. You also notice there is no liner for this. It's just the back spring going through there. You do see the brass rivets that are similar, but size-wise, the MA6 really makes the Traveler look small. So it's definitely not the same knife there. And when you open up the blades, you see definitely a different length blade. So you've got about one blade was about a 1/2 inch too short, and the other blade is about a 1/2 inch too long. So what the Traveler does is it falls right in between the MA5 and the MA6 by Schrade. Now, Schrade might have made some other fillet knife that was built on this frame, but this knife is not based off of either the MA5 or the MA6 by Schrade, so it's not a member of the Mighty Angler family by Schrade. And I suspect this was a knife that was basically designed by Chicago Cutlery, and they contacted Schrade, and Schrade made it for them. And it's odd because I like the shape of this one better than the Mighty Anglers any day of the week. But as for it being a steak knife, I don't think it's the best choice for being a steak knife. I'll give you a couple other examples that I think would make a better steak knife than the Traveler. Well, first of all, it would be hard for me not to say the toothpick. I think the toothpick would make a better, a nice large toothpick, a 5-inch toothpick, even a 4-inch toothpick would make a pretty good steak knife. I think one with a little bit more heft to it, like this powder horn by Kudeman, this would be a really nice looking steak knife also, especially with the ring lock going on and everything. So locking blade. So that could be a really decent steak knife. But I think what they would say is, you know what? Sodbuster. This is the way to go. If you're looking for a knife a nice folding knife for a steak knife, why not go with the original butcher blade out of Germany and go with the Sodbuster or any of the other peasant style knives. This would be, an ideal folding steak knife to have with you, and just a good ideal knife to have with you in general. Or if you wanted to go with Opinel, you could always grab one of these too. I like the slimline version. And again, nothing fancy about it, but got that going. You'll give the ring lock a little twist. Come on, ring lock, twist for me. You got a nice steak knife. So those were the kind of knives that I would look at as a good folding steak knife. But this is really, like I said, this is really more of a fillet knife. And as a fillet knife, you got a pretty decent flex on the blade. I have not used this knife. I don't plan on using it either, but you got a blade length on there, 5-inch length for the blade for a fillet knife. I know a lot of people like that kind of length on a fillet knife. I use mostly a 4-inch blade because, well, I'm mostly dealing with pan fish and stuff, so 4 inches is more than enough. But got a nice flex to it with the blade length going. But you have also an overall length of this thing that is over 6 inches long. So a 6-inch handle for a 5-inch blade on a fillet knife is a little bit much when you think about it. So, and I got a feeling that's one of the reasons why these just did not catch on, because while it's nice to have a folding fillet knife, have a 5-inch blade in a 6.5-inch area, it's really, you got a lot of weight in that handle, and if you're going to be filleting a lot of fish, it seems to me it just make more sense just to have your typical fixed blade fillet knife, because quite frankly, usually when you're filleting the fish and everything, you're in the camp area. You're not out in the middle of nowhere trying to cut it all up and everything. So you're usually in a stationary spot where you got the fixed blade anyway. So I got a feeling that's one of the reasons why these knives and other folding fillet knives really never catch on. And I've got quite a few folding fillet knives, but I consider all of them more or less novelties because they're not as comfortable to use, and they're heavy. They're much heavier than your typical fillet knife with the same length blade. So I think that's why folding fillet knives just aren't that popular. But maybe that's why people also said this for a steak knife, because for a steak knife with a 5-inch blade, and you got something like this that you can go into that restaurant and open up and use this to cut up your steak, that would be kind of pretty cool, even if you're just cutting up fish with it. So anyway, there's my Traveler. I really like it. It's pretty cool, and you just don't see them anymore. So if you see one and you can afford it, go ahead and grab it. I think right now the prices on the Travelers are going north of $100 in this kind of shape. If you can find one in almost mint condition, they're definitely north of $100. So if you can get one for less than that, definitely grab it, because they're only going to go up in value because they just aren't made anymore. Especially if you can find the USA made ones. let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with the Pious. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.